Hey everybody, the Director of Public Information for the South Carolina Election Commission is joining us, which is a really great opportunity to ask some questions about what's been going on at the polls, some of which you guys have told us about, some of which we're hearing from various interest parties about their concerns about how things transpire today. Chris, this has been a really unusual election, right? We had COVID-19, we had way fewer poll workers, that led to complications, and you guys have had reported problems, right?
Yeah, so, we're conducting an election today and under extraordinary conditions. A shortage of poll managers, combined polling places, unavailability of facilities. Some counties were fine on the number of poll managers, some struggled. Um, Poll managers conducting the election wearing personal protective equipment, masks and face shields and gloves for hours, and voters experiencing lines and waiting in those lines. So I have to say thank you to those people for enduring that and their dedication to the process. I think that's inspiring. Yeah, so we saw some issues throughout the state, a lot here in Richland County, where there are some people still in line right now at some polling places in Richland County.
Wow, and it's what, 9 o'clock on Tuesday night?
9 o'clock on Tuesday night. And in Richland, you really had a situation where you had even more of a problem with consolidation of polling places and poll manager shortages. So they had some places where 5 precincts are voting in the same place with a shortage of poll managers, with COVID-19 procedures on top of it. And then even the poll managers they have, the ones that were willing to serve, a lot of them were new. They stepped forward and said, yeah, I'll serve, but not experienced. And I think that's led to some of the problems.
All right, Chris, let's talk about Greenville, because locally we've had the elections director here talking about how there is confusion. Some people may have voted in the wrong precinct. What problem does that create? What's going to happen as a result of that?
Well, every ballot that's cast, if it's not a provisional ballot, so whether a voter voted in the wrong precinct, or even got the wrong ballot, those ballots are destined to be cast. And so, I'm sorry, destined to be counted. So those ballots will be counted, and there'll be a record of how many voters voted, how many Republicans, how many Democrats, and what ballots they received. But there was a lot of confusion out there today about ballot styles and what people saw on their ballots. And some of that it wasn't really an issue because, for example, we heard from voters that said, hey, Jamie Harrison wasn't on my ballot. Well, Jamie Harrison was the only Democrat who filed for U.S. Senate. He is the party nominee. He's not on the primary ballot. And then you have some other issues where voters are expecting to see a candidate from one district, but they learn they're not really in that district. Or we even had some counties that did not have a Democratic primary at all. So you had Democratic voters going to vote, but having no Democratic primary to vote in. So when if a voter votes in the wrong or even gets the wrong ballot, hopefully that's caught at the time they did it and they're able to correct that. But if not, it's destined to be counted and it will be included in the election results.
All right, let's talk a little bit more about Greenville, though, because we're getting specific questions because the candidates are potentially could the candidates not protest about the result if they feel that somehow they've missed out on votes because somebody got the wrong ballot or didn't go to the right precinct or didn't get the right information to cast the right ballot?
Yes, candidates can protest election results and primary results. In a primary, the protest goes to the political party. Candidates can file protests and basically make their argument to say that this thing happened and I believe it had an impact on the outcome of the election and I want a new primary. So that's the nature of a protest. And in this case, it would either be the county party that hears it, or if it's a state level office, it would be the state party.
How does that work? Once they make that claim, what happens? What threshold do they have to meet or prove to be able to get a new election?
Well, they have to prove to the body that's hearing the protest that the error that occurred renders the outcome of the election doubtful. So it isn't just showing that mistakes occurred. The courts have recognized over the years that there's no such thing as a perfect election. There's a lot of moving parts to an election. There will be things that are going to happen. It's the type of errors that rise to the level of putting the election results in doubt. So many people got wrong ballots that we really don't know if it had been done correctly, what the results had been. Say somebody wins big, if somebody loses, the person who loses protest, they would have a very big threshold to meet to try to prove that those errors impacted the results.
If there were another election because somebody reached the threshold, what does that cost the taxpayers, and what's that process like? Like, when would we see that kind of thing happen?
So that varies by which office it is. So if it was a state house seat, for example, it might be $30,000, $35,000. If it is a state level, statewide office, which is only one of those on the ballot, U.S. Senate on the Republican side was a statewide office. You're talking about a few $1,000,000 to conduct a whole statewide election again. So. In my 15 plus years here, I've never seen a statewide election go to a protest and have to be redone. But I have seen some local elections, and if you get down to the county council level, where it's even less than countywide, it really depends on how many polling places and precincts and how many poll managers are involved. That's the biggest cost of conducting an election, is paying poll managers.
Chris, have you seen the statement that's been put out by the South Carolina Democratic Party? They're talking about hundreds of voter irregularities today in South Carolina. They say we're getting reports of incorrect ballots being uploaded, candidates' names being left off the ballot, polling managers trying to persuade voters to participate in different primaries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, what's your take on that? I mean, obviously you're not there at every poll, but what's your reaction to that?
So in every election, we do get a lot of reports similar to that. I would say that's kind of a laundry list of the types of things we hear on election day. There certainly was a lot more today of issues with voters saying they got the wrong ballot style. And on election day, and here on election night, it's very difficult to say how much of that could be voters actually getting the wrong ballot style, and how much of it is it about confusion. But those are the types of things that we'll sort through in the coming days, and work with both parties to look at those issues and see what really happened there.
When it comes to the absentee voting, okay, we know there was a lot of that done this time, right, because of COVID-19. How much absentee voting was done? How much beyond what is normally expected? And how late is it going to take to count that, or is it already counted?
A lot of absentee voting. So we issued over 190,000 absentee ballots. That's more than 3 times the number of absentee ballots that have ever been cast in a statewide primary. The previous record was about 61,000. We did 190 something thousand. So, and the other interesting thing about that is most of them were by mail, which is the exact opposite of the way it usually is. Usually, most absentee is cast in person at the voter registration office. People just go by the office, vote in person, because generally it's easier. Well, under COVID-19, it's safer to do it by mail. Most people took advantage of that, and over 2/3 of the absentee ballots cast were by mail. And it does take longer to process absentee by mail. So will that impact the how long it takes to get election results tonight? That's possible. I see we have going on 300,000 ballots already in on our website, and that sort of lags behind what's actually going on out there in the counties. So it's certainly a possibility. Whether it creates noticeable delays, I think we'll know that a little bit later. But it certainly takes election officials longer to process those. One thing they did have going for them, though, is there was a legislative change earlier this year that allowed county officials to be able to open the outside envelope of those by mail absentee ballots at 9 a.m. on Monday. So they started opening those yesterday morning. Now this morning is when they could start opening the inside envelope and actually getting that ballot out and scanning it. So still a lot of work to be done, but that was helpful. And so we've been concerned about that, how long it's going to take with the numbers, but hopefully we can outperform what we were expecting, sort of what we were concerned about. So we'll know that very soon.
Like, what was your worst case scenario for that many absentee votes in your mind?
Well, I would say worst case scenario is that counties go late into the night and possibly even into the next day. That's kind of what we've been saying. And looking back, a couple of weeks ago, as we saw those numbers really growing, people really voting absentee by mail, we were concerned that number was going to surpass the record for absentee by mail, which was set in the 2016 general election. That was about 140,000. We did about 127,000. So we didn't quite get to that level. So county election officials have processed this number of absentee ballots before in the 2016 general election, but it is amazing that we're even talking about 2016 general election type absentee numbers in a statewide primary.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a strange year. It surely is. When you talk about what can be learned from today, especially sounds like the Richland scenario, and there were definitely issues here in Greenville. What can we take away? Do you think it will better prepare the state to handle this in November?
Yes, it's going to be a whole new ball game in November. Set coronavirus and COVID-19 aside for a minute. We expect the turnout in the general election, the presidential election this year, to be very high. It has been for the past several presidential elections. We'll take the lessons learned that in preparing for this election, and then the lessons learned from today, and carry those forward to November. So we need to do a better job of statewide of recruiting poll managers and getting those poll managers in place. We didn't have a lot of time to work with leading up to June 9th. That's the good thing. We have more time leading up to November, and there was a lot of work done to recruit new poll managers. And so counties do have new pools of poll managers, and will continue to grow those. So that'll be important going into November, that we have enough poll managers. And then polling locations. So we have time to find locations that we can be sure that we'll be able to use in November. That was one of the things county election officials struggled with, is they had facilities that said, hey, due to COVID-19, you can't use our place. So having a polling place for every precinct, having enough poll managers for every precinct, and then applying technology to the absentee by mail process, even if the legislative change that allowed everyone to vote absentee, that expires on June 30th. The General Assembly could come back and restart that. But regardless of whether everyone's qualified or not, a lot of people will continue to vote absentee in November, and we need to be prepared for that.
Chris, we appreciate you so much joining us to talk about this really important time to catch up with you and make sure we know sort of how scenarios would play out after the problems that were reported in Greenville especially. Thank you. Appreciate you taking the time.
You're welcome, Amy. Thank you.
Take care.